Hey, so this is something I see way too often. So let me basically introduce you to the actual issue. So let's just say I require, and what you see here, by the way, is a out-of-the-box Neon 3 installation, but it really doesn't matter what you're using. Let's assume that we have, let's actually install um, Composer require a Neon 3 apps DB. I'm just gonna, load a database wrapper. Also, really doesn't matter what you're using at this point. This is just to show you the actual problem. Oh, I seem to have a different version here. By transformer, is that already installed? Is that the point? Where's my vendor? No, it isn't. It isn't. This is a blank project. Sorry, I should have been prepared a little bit better. But let's get this done quickly. Okay. Okay, so now we have a DB. So let's just say what you have in any kind of in your index file or whatever. You probably have to generate, some kind of database credentials, right, or whatever credentials it might be. So let's just assume that I'm going to say set environment, and so what people like to do is to do stuff like, okay, so the host is, whatever local host, let's say, and then the user is, I don't know, root, and then the password is my password, right? So there are a couple of problems with this approach is, and by the way, this is also if you're using like PDO out of the box or MySQLi out of the box, it really doesn't matter. So you would basically expose everything of relevance directly in the code. So if you're working on anything that is a public repo, that's I mean that's already an obvious problem. But even if not, and then effectively you have within the web root exposed credentials. So you don't really want to have that. So what is the solution to that? Is, and a lot of people say like, well, require a file that is outside of the web root, and that file basically contains the relevant information. But that actually means that sharing those credentials on a secure basis is kind of hard, and you also have to remember, to like, well, which format and so on, and how you're going to upload that. So how to get out of this problem? And the easiest solution is, of course, to say, well, we're going to use a couple of onboard functionality. So in Neon 3, it's actually pretty simple. I can basically say credentials is get credentials. And that's probably because it's an unhandled exception. Yep, I should try that, but that'll suffice for now. And then I could basically do something for credentials database, right? So how does this work though? And that's exactly the point. So the Neon 3 CLI has a tool that basically is Neon 3 credentials. And actually, I'm using an old system here. Hold on. Let's quickly update that to the newest version. And by the way, this is a command you can basically run. And this again, I mean, this is very targeted at Neon 3. Let me just see. Yep, that's the newest version. But if we're talking about the credentials functionality, you can use that in whatever context you want. So again, I'm running Neon 3 credentials. Okay, so what you can see here is I have already a couple of credentials saved here. Let's just say I'm going to do create new for now, and basically say, okay, this would be database, right? And the database, for example, has a host. All right, or let's do a name for now. And the name is, so the database name is, I don't know, DB app. Okay, and then I can basically see that I have access to this, right? So now basically database holds a name, which is basically something that I've now passed into wherever I'm using it. So let's just assume I, go through all of my stuff, and then naturally the question is, well, where do those effectively live? So you can run this in your development system, and you can run this in your live application. So you would basically run this credentials command in your live environment in your shell as well. So what happens? So if you're not using the Neon 3 framework, then what you need to do is, instead of basically just using the get credentials function, and actually we can look into this. What is this doing? So this basically goes to the well, most outer reachable situation here in the folder credentials, and looks for the credentials JSON. So which basically means if I were to look into, hold on, let me just get you anything in here. If I just go into my A in that case, I can see that a folder credentials was created, and the credential JSON is in here, and that's where it's stored. So outside of basically, let's just assume that you're running a Ubuntu online, this would simply basically say, okay, so in the root of the OS itself, you will find the credentials folder, and you would basically get that. I mean, you don't even have to use PHP, of course. You can basically just include that file, and then you have access to your credentials, and that basically gets you around the problem of having to worry about credentials in your repo. So if you have like in open source or a public repository of whatever sort, you basically can manage your credentials completely outside of the project, and therefore don't risk any kind of exposure. And that's basically the motivation for this short video, because I've seen that a lot. That when I looked into repositories, that I actually found like GitHub tokens, database credentials, you name it, which is a rather unsecure way of handling it. And if you think about the difference between your production environment and your development environment, it also cleans up code, because I don't have to account for various credentials that might be different. So on my live database, that might not be localhost, but like a host pointing to an Amazon RDS instance, for example. And that makes things very, very clean, because the code wouldn't care. Do you handle the credentials completely externally? If you have any questions about that, please comment, and I will explain a little bit more in detail. I know this is a very quick run through, but just feel free to consider that. I've seen that way too often, and it generates a lot of security issues. Thank you very much, and see you soon.